I'll start with Mr. Jason Patrick Wood. He is a partner at the law firm of Wood and Delgado, a firm focused on business transactions for dentists and doctors, leases, purchase agreements, partnership agreements, shareholder agreements, corporations, associate agreements, and other business-related legal needs. Mr. Wood has authored many articles relative to the business side of dentistry, which have appeared in Dental Economics, CDA Journal, The News Dentist, Dental Town Magazine, Colorado Dental Association Journal, as well as numerous Dental Society newsletters. His CE podcasts pertaining to the business side of dentistry are some of the most viewed dental podcasts in the country. He's also a moderator for Dental Town online forums for the business and transition side of things, and enjoys educating doctors throughout the United States. Prior to joining Wood and Delgado, Mr. Wood worked in Washington, D.C. for the Speaker of the House in connection with presidential and U.S. congressional campaigns, and thereafter worked for the U.S. House of Representatives drafting legislation for various House committees. Doug Sellen is joining us from PMA Practice Transitions. He earned his bachelor's degree in business management from Franklin University. Mr. Sellen brings over 30 years of experience in the banking and financial service sector with extensive expertise working with dental professionals. He resides in Westerville and Loveland, Ohio. Doug's assisted with thousands of dental transactions, as well as veterinary optometry and physician sales, startups, commercial real estate, construction projects, refinances, and consolidations. Mr. Sellen has spoken at numerous local, state, and national conferences and societies throughout the U.S. He has presented at countless universities, alumni associations, local and national sales service organizations. Doug brings an immense amount of expertise in management and business development from serving in numerous management and leadership positions. And he's coming from a part of a very small group of individuals that founded one of the industry's largest healthcare lending groups. And lastly, Mr. Adam Bratland is a former practice owner of Chris Dental, Mr. Bratland and his brother, Dr. Michael Bratland, purchased and managed a dozen clinics along the I-5 corridor. Mr. Bratland served as the operations manager, recruiter, and director of clinical acquisitions. They sold those clinics in November 2018 to the third largest DSO in the U.S. Mr. Bratland is now a broker with Cassani Associates based in the Pacific Northwest. And as a former property manager and agent, Mr. Bratland has extensive background in commercial real estate. His current focus is on dental practice brokerage, including practice sales to private buyers and DSOs. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on demand on our ADS website. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, please use the chat feature to submit them for our panelists for answering later on. So this is a somewhat of a continuation of the theme of DSOs and working with DSOs. And Doug, I'd like to turn some time over to you. Maybe you can recap the presentation webinar we hosted last November.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So last year we did our first DSO 101 for sellers and associates, and we took a high level look at what the benefits are for a seller and also for what it would be for an associate. Just to give a little bit of recap on that, the DSOs emerged really back in the mid-90s. Today, there are several specialty DSOs as well. Currently, there's approximately, we estimate, around 40 large DSOs where they have 75 plus practices under their entity. There's approximately 250 mid-market DSOs with approximately between 10 and 74 practices under their ownership. But most DSOs are regional, servicing 10 or fewer states. Just to recap a little bit of the appetite, what a DSO is typically looking for from a practice profile. They're looking for anything that has 5+ operatories, more of a modern practice as opposed to something that's very antiquated. They're looking for practices that are typically in non-rural communities. They like revenues north of 700,000, and then some have even much larger appetites, so they want them to be in the $1 million and up. They typically are looking at fee-for-service and PPO practices. They rarely have much of an appetite when there's Medicaid or state supported type of insurances as part of the mix of revenue. And I'd say it's the majority, if not always, they're requiring that the owner, the seller, to remain in the practice. Before COVID, we were seeing that it was like a 3 to 5 year period. Now it's more common to be 5 years is like the hard number, but there occasionally you may get something a little bit less than that. We're gonna go through some illustrations later at the towards the end of our discussion today to talk about kind of like what does that look like, or what could that look like from a conservative standpoint.
Thanks, Doug. And just as a side note, for those that are interested in looking at last year's webinar on DSOs 101, that is also available on the ADS website. So one of the big questions and what our focus will probably be on for today is, when does it make sense for a dental practice owner to sell to a DSO? And open that up for discussion with our panelists.
Okay. Well, Jeremy, I can start that off with saying that I think what I see most common with a dentist who is ripe for a DSO sale is someone who absolutely completely does not enjoy entrepreneurship anymore, or maybe they never have. They don't have sharp business acumen. And what I hear repeatedly is, all I want to do is practice dentistry. I can't handle the stress. This isn't worth being in practice if I have to do all these other things. I just want to show up and practice dentistry, take care of my patients. So I would say that's the primary thing that I hear is when somebody just sounds like they're done, they've thrown in the towel, they do not enjoy being a manager or an entrepreneur. There's some other categories too that maybe DSOs can be helpful in a sale when other private buyers may be reluctant to jump into a practice. And I had a particular situation where the overhead of a practice that was collecting about 1.3 million was right around 80%. And a lot of private buyers don't necessarily want to step into a practice like that. However, a particular DSO came along and they know that through their management style and maybe changing some things around as far as where they order labs or supplies, or just in general, knowing that there is going to be a normalization of expenses that they can fit in their model, they went in and were able to purchase the practice. Whereas I had the practice on the market for close to a year, and I really wasn't able to find any other buyers that were interested in taking this particular practice on. So that was a good fit. And the doctor did want to work back for a bit. He didn't want to just leave. So that worked out great. I would say, other situations may be where a doctor really enjoys working and doesn't want to retire. However, they know that if they cut their practice down from 4 days a week down to 3 days a week and eventually 2.5 to 2, that when they go to sell, there probably won't be any value in it, but they still want to work there, and they love the patients and they love the atmosphere. And I do know a dentist who is a friend of mine who is 80 years old, and he just sold to a DSO with a 5-year work back. Now, I really don't know if he's going to make it to that, that level in 5 years. And to him, his biggest concern wasn't necessarily that he was going to get every penny of his withhold, because his withhold payments extended out to 5 years. But the thought, he couldn't grasp the thought of leaving his team yet, but he knew that he had to sell because he's 80. And of course he wasn't as high functioning as he used to be. So I have seen that. I've also quite commonly hear dentists say they just want to be part of a team. They don't like being out on an island. They feel like they're isolated and all alone. So they want some kind of camaraderie, whether that's the DSO bringing in an associate to work in their practice with them, or maybe within that DSO community, whether it be CE or those, corporate functions or whatever it is, they just don't want to feel isolated anymore. So, and sometimes that's a fleeting feeling, and sometimes they work through that and realize that, there's other ways to engage with other dentists rather than selling to a DSO.
Great. Jason, Doug, anything else you want to add to Adam's comments?
Well, for me, I get about 15 to 20 calls a week from 38 to 44-year-olds who are contemplating selling to a DSO. And I can tell you that the vast majority of them should not be selling, but they're worried about the future. They're worried about staff issues. They're worried about, future economic issues. And, they're seeing these big purchase prices from DSOs that are higher than what they could get from an individual practice owner. And so they're rushing into these situations because there's DSOs that are courting doctors now that are really going after the private sector in a way that they want to be first to the consumer, because if they're first to the consumer, they can save hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the problem is when people come to me and they're going, hey, I got a great offer. When we start diving into the numbers and figuring out, okay, well, how long do you want to continue practicing? And you're 40, 42, 44, you tell me you want to practice till you're 60. Have you run those numbers? Have you run those economic equations? Yeah, but I'm going to get a great, big payout at the end with, when they do a recap. Well, the problem with that is yes, you very well may get a big payout with the recap. But when you factor in the fact that you still want to work 10 or 15 years and you do the profits and you do the tax analysis and you run compounding interest equations and you run investment returns, you find out that continuing to own, if you're going to continue working for 10 or 15 years, is the number one decision to do, rather than selling to a DSO simply because you're a little worried about staffing issues, which, by the way, everybody is dealing with now, including DSOs, or you're worried about future economic issues or dental reimbursement issues. I can tell you that we're dealing with multiple millions of dollars if you sell too early. So that would be my one thing, is you really need to take a step back and you really need to analyze, does this not just make a lifestyle decision, but does this make an economic decision? Is this right for me? Is this right for my family? Because you're still going to have most of the management issues. You're still going to have the weight of the world on your shoulders because you are still going to be the main person in your practice, at least for that 3 to 5 years. And as Doug and Adam correctly pointed out, that's really more like 5 years now. And so I just want my biggest thing, if you guys take nothing from this, the next hour, it is to take a step back and really analyze on multiple levels, because there's about 10 different levels of equations that you need to run that are economic, that are lifestyle, that are future, retirement planning. All of these issues come into whether or not we sell. But 9 times out of 10, when you're 40 or 38, you probably shouldn't sell unless you have some, you hate dentistry, you want out. There's a lot of issues that I really suggest you guys take a step back on.
Well, Jason, and I'm going to add to that too, because I completely agree with you. And it's really hard to take somebody in their 30s and 40s and talk about retirement. And really the question that I want to ask them is, do you want to have the possibility of retiring in your late 50s, or do you want to retire when you're 70?
Right.
Because that could be the difference, depending on where your practice is and when you decide to sell, is that you may be working a whole lot longer than you thought you were going to work, based on that loss of income and the ability to self-fund your retirement and other creative things that accountants can do for you as a practice owner versus a W-2 employee.
Right. Well, let me ask you, you're both brokers. So what do you tell doctors when they say, but I'm worried about the future saleability of my practice?
I would say that
If
depends
I don't
on
sell
their
now,
age.
what am I gonna do?
I would say that depends on their age. If it's somebody who's older and maybe has mild or health concerns, that, what happens, say if they have diabetes, and that may depend on how old they are, and then also how debilitating the diabetes is. Like, I want to stay in it. I just don't know how long I'm going to be able to continue to fully function as a dentist. So I would say it really depends on the situation.
If they're young, if they're healthy, and they're saying, look, I'm worried that the market is going to go the way that the MD market went. And if I wait too long, I'm not going to have a valuable asset. What's the response there?
Okay, well, here's my response. And my response is that we are graduating roughly about the same amount of dentists we did in 1970. So it's about, we're graduating about 10% more dentists than we did in 1970. However, the population of the US has grown 50%.
Right.
So, and then they'll say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that it'll be easy for people to just, start from scratch and build out their own practice? No, not necessarily, because if you look at what it costs to take raw commercial property right now and throw in walls, plumbing, chairs, electrical, it's absolutely exorbitant. It's so much more affordable to buy a practice. And on top of it, you buy a practice that's actually a business that has income coming in. So I feel that the potential for the future, I don't see any drop off in the saleability of dental practices at all in the near future.
I concur with Adam on that. And also you briefly hit startups. If you wanted to start a practice today, you're looking north of 600, if not 700,000 for 4, maybe 5 plumb chairs and 2 equipped. And it's going to take you up to a year to get possession of that facility, just because the shortage of product, the shortage of labor, the cost, just the sheer everything involved with it. So again, if you want to plan for that, great, but you're going to be spending 3 or 4 times probably what you did when you started that practice that you're currently contemplating selling.
So going back to that initial question of when does it make sense to sell to DSO, some of the things that we heard were, if the practice owner is just completely burned out, emotionally drained from running the management of it, and all they want to do is clinical, or that they're looking for some additional resources to help with because their overhead's just way above where it needs to be, kind of that sweet spot is 55-60%. If you're north of 70%, maybe there's some leverage that the DSO can bring in with their resources, economy of scales. Are there other situations where it says, hey, this makes sense to sell to a DSO?
I had another one that could be a one-off, but it was a mid 40-year-old dentist who was going through pretty much a mental health crisis, in that he had a child that had some really severe medical conditions, and at the same time he was going through a divorce, which ultimately was going to lead him into a bankruptcy. And he loved his practice, 8 beautiful ops, had a fantastic staff, and although he knew that in the long run this would delay his retirement, accompanied with the divorce, probably by 20 years, he just wasn't in the mental capacity to be able to steer himself through that situation. So he did avoid bankruptcy. He did get his divorce, in which the DSO was very graceful because they put up more cash to close, including extra cash so that he could catch up on his child support.
Thanks,
and
Adam.
that could be a one-off, but it worked out well.
And maybe a takeaway there from what your comments, as well as Jason's earlier comments, are sometimes the decision maybe to sell to DSO isn't just financially driven. There might be some personal things going on with the practice owner that says, hey, this makes sense to offload the management and administration side, let the DSO take that on, and I still am able and wanting to practice for several more years, but not as the owner. And that's what we see in our market. Anything else to add as far as the idea of when it makes sense to sell?
Well, a question did come up is what is the typical evaluation formula used by DSOs? And the answer is, unfortunately, it varies widely. I mean, I've seen as low, even in the last few months, I've seen as low as 4 times EBITDA, to as high as 9 times. But it really, it really depends. And I think the highest values that I've seen, and by the way, just so everyone knows, DSOs value businesses different than doctor to doctor. So they analyze based upon an EBITDA formula. And what they do is they factor in a normal doctor comp. So when you're running your EBITDA formulas, where I see the biggest mistake is people forget to factor in a normal doc compensation. But anyways, I've seen anywhere from 4 to 9 times EBITDA. The lowest values that I see are the ones that try to do it on their own. The highest values I've seen are those that go with a broker and have those brokers competing have the DSOs competing for the doctors. But I would say it's all over the place. And you have to do your homework on who the DSOs are. And we get into that further as to the types of models out there.
Good points.
Yep.
And as far as kind of the other side of it, when is it maybe not the best idea for the practice owner and it just doesn't make sense to sell to DSO? Either retain the practice and hold off selling it or look at a private buyer. So what are some situations practice owners should be aware of when it doesn't make sense for a DSO sale?
I mean, if you're still enjoying what you do and running the business, you understand it, you're having a good time, still going to work, there's always going to be headwinds and tailwinds. You go back to 2008 and the stock market and everything went north. And then, we went through COVID, we went through another thing. We just went through some midterm elections, and there's always something that's going to be pushing or pulling you. But if you still enjoy what you're doing, you're making good money, you're funding your retirement, why would you do that? There's no reason to get out if you're still enjoying it, is my opinion. And some people I talk to, they're like, well, I still love going to work. I love my staff. They love me. My patients love me. Great. So why are we talking about selling to a corporate group today? You're not even ready to sell. So let's do a few more years of what you're doing and let's circle back in 3 to 5 years and see if you're now ready then. So I think it's timing and it's mental health. Again, like I said, there's always gonna be things coming at you from all different directions. It's having a team of people to help you through them when things are tough. Like Jason mentioned earlier, everybody's having staffing issues. That's just the current thing. In time, will it right its way? It should. But it's just something we're dealing with.
I would add to that and also say that if you are a doctor, depending on your health concerns or you do have medical concerns, is that if you think that your health is going to get progressively worse quicker, then a DSO may not be the way to go because of the fact that, if there's any question and doubt that you'll be able to sustain practicing for up to 5 years at a high capacity, you're much better to sell right now.
Okay.
And I would also say that even though I gave reasons why you should sell to a DSO, in most situations, I would say at least 75% of the conversations that I have where a doctor wants to talk about selling to a DSO, at least 75%, I convince them that is not the right way to go.
And it sounds like one of the things that most of us are seeing and hearing based on experience is that when you're making this consideration and looking at the options, pulling in your tax planning advisor, your CPA, a broker, helping you understand what your options are and what the consequences are as far as the numbers is going to be really critical. If money's not an option, you go, I don't need the money from the sale. Maybe that's a different route, but I think looking at your advisors, bringing them in early is going to be critical, making a good choice for anyone. Any other thoughts on when it doesn't make sense to sell to DSO?
Well, I always get worried that people are selling too early. That's my biggest fear and my biggest concern, because the easiest way or the quickest way out of debt is to own a business. The easiest way, the quickest way to retirement is to own a business. And so figuring out your timeline for retirement, and then planning, having a 3, a 5, a 10-year time period in terms of your planning, it is really going to help you and alleviate a lot of the stress and concerns that you may have of the future unknown. Living below your means, and really focusing on, okay, my number is 55 when I want to retire. What does that mean? And then backing down to your current age, rather than, oh, I'm 42, I've got this debt associated with my practice, and I'm so worried about debt because I listened to Dave Ramsey, who is absolutely horrible when it comes to business advice, but is amazing when it comes to personal advice. And we have to remember that. But anyways, digress. And then factoring in these timelines that you can then have measurable goals to get you to where you want to go, rather than, if I cash out now, I will be debt free, and not realizing that by cashing out now, you're sacrificing profits, you're sacrificing preferential tax issues, preferential retirement planning to get you out of debt, which then unfortunately usually costs you millions of dollars. Again, I'm always assuming that you want to clinically continue to practice. And so I tend to like 3 to 5 years before retirement is when you are starting to look at selling, whether that's to a DSO or to a private buyer, but that's our timeline, not 15 years before we're going to retire. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're in that 5-year window. That's a great time to start having conversations with your advisors and make sure you know what options are available. And to the earlier point that Jason made, the experience is you're always going to, more times than not, have a better result and a higher sales price when you have options. And usually those options are there when you hire an advisor like a broker that understands the market and knows who the players are and who's going to be a good fit for that practice owner.
Sorry, but I will say that you have, and this is not an attack on all brokers, but there are a lot of brokers out there, and I've been very surprised. I mean, not surprised. I've been happy to hear some of what Adam and Doug have been saying, because it's very infrequent to hear brokers say, hey, you need to wait. There's a lot of brokers out there that will push you into selling too early. There's a DSO broker in Florida, I will not name just because I don't want to be sued, but who pushes gloom and doom to get you to sign up with him, and it's not in your best interest. And it again, anyone who's pushing you without analyzing all the numbers, I'm going to tell you to run as far away from, especially when they start talking about how big their yacht is and things like that. Yeah, please run.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
So just briefly, when is panelists, when is the best time to, generally speaking, to look at selling your dental practice? Where in your career should you, whether that's an age or collections or the maturity of your practice, when is the best time to typically sell your dental practice?
I'd say if you're even thinking about it, like the next 3 to 5 years, you should be talking with a broker, a consultant about what is my practice currently worth? What do I need to do to make it worth more? They have these ideas as what they think it's worth or what somebody down the street sold for. Practices are night and day. Revenue is one component. Technology, wages, expenses, overhead, types of insurance, type of technology. There's so many different variables that go into the value. Like Adam said, he had one that was a great practice, 8 operatories, amazing office, but over a year went by and nobody. Or you could have the same practice and tomorrow it sells in a couple weeks. It's you just don't know. Things take time. These things don't transition like residential properties where you get multiple offers on day one. so above asking price.
Very good. So as far as kind of shifting gears a little bit, let's say you are leaning towards and your advisors are saying, hey, the pathway towards a sale to the DSO is a good path. What does that structure of the sale look like?
So it depends. There are DSOs out there that will do a full 100% acquisition of your practice, where, you know, the DSO will come in and own, and depending upon what state you're in, they'll either own everything or they'll own all the non-clinical assets, and then they'll have, I'll call it a dummy corporation, that is owned by a doctor that is, you know, in allegiance with the DSO. They'll come in and own all of the patient records. And that's one way of doing it. The best example of that is Heartland. They'll come in and do it that way. And then the other model, the emerging model that has really picked up steam in the last 5 years is the partnership model, which is either A, you continue to own a certain percentage of your practice, usually 30 to 40%. I've seen as high as 49%. And you continue to receive profit associated with that after a management fee. And then there's also this other model where you sell 100% of your practice, but then you receive units in the parent company. And that is, you know, predicated upon how big your practice is, how big of a holdback, or how much you're willing to run with the company. That can be, and typically 20 to 40% of the value of your practice is associated with those management units. You know, what I would say is there's definitely more upside with the partnership model or the equity conversion model, but there's also risk associated with that as well. You need to analyze who you're getting in bed with. Have they done a recap before? Have they, you know, what do their financials look like? And I will tell you right now, I have seen a lot of these DSO financials, and a lot of them are not as good as you would think that they are. Some of them are basically using your equity to grow. That's a concern. Are they in the red, or are they in the black as it relates to their monthly income, as it relates to their monthly outflow? The 100% ownership model like Heartland, they typically have a pretty large holdback that is predicated upon future revenues. And so you really need to figure out how to protect that holdback, because there are certain companies that'll come in, and because you have the holdback for 30% of the practice, they'll come in, they'll nuclear bomb the staff, get them out because they think the staff is too highly paid. They'll bring in, you know, neophyte staff members because, hey, if revenues drop, that's on you, the dentist, not on them, the DSO. So anyways, I would just say that you really, really, really need to understand who you are choosing to do the deal with, because I think I might have brought this up last time. I had a deal, $30 million deal with a $6 million holdback, and my guy and I told him not to do the deal. My guy called me back 6 months later, basically crying, saying, I should have listened to you. I'm working 100-hour weeks. None of my staff is still here. I'm at wit's end. I'm just trying to maintain my revenue so I can get my 6 million. And he said it was the worst year and a half of his life. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jason. And just as a quick side note, for those of our viewers that aren't familiar with the holdback, that's that part of the sales price that is not received by the owner at closing. Panelists, what are you seeing as far as holdbacks with DSO deals right now?
30%.
Yeah, typical is 30%.
Yeah, or more, 30, 40.
For a period of time of 3 to 5 years, depending on the work back. Also, it's tied to your production. Your revenue of the practice, the expenses of the practice. There's multiple different things that are going to be tied to that. It's kind of like the post-closing employment. Now that you're not the owner, now you're the employee. Well, here's a different set of rules that you may have to live up to now.
Well, I wanted to add on to what Jason was talking about when we're discussing different models and what to look for. And another thing to look for is those companies that are right up front and honest, saying they do intend to recap, which is essentially sell that portfolio. What I see is that DSO, their target is to get to 100 to 150 practices, and they need to do that. There's a time period, there's a time window for when they need to do that, because when they get their venture capital fund or wherever they get their money, there's a plan here for them that they pitch their investors that say at year 6 or 7, they're going to sell, they're going to buy these practices, let's say at 4 times EBITDA, and then they're going to sell them at 10 times EBITDA. And those investors are expected to be paid out at a certain time period. And a large reason for that is as they acquire all these practices with 5-year workbacks, those doctor owners who are retiring at 5 years, there's a high likelihood that practice is going to start declining in revenue once you get that owner, that original owner, superstar investor out of there when he decides to retire, he or she, I should say. So that after they get to a certain point, these DSOs, they have to be very careful, because they might get to year 6 and notice that all these practices where those dentists are retiring and have served their 5 years start to retire, that they're having a hard time getting associates, and are getting associates that can produce what the original owner could produce. And it's kind of a game of hot potato. I think we're going to see some DSOs that miss their target window and start seeing some serious declines in revenue. And, we could see some of the, a few of the mid-sized DSOs buckle. So I would say it's another thing that if somebody's going to look into selling to a DSO, do you intend to recap? When did you start? When did this fund start? When did you purchase that first practice? And where are we at now? And when do you think you're going to recap? I think that's incredibly important. There's a big difference between being one of the first 5 to join a DSO that just got their funds versus maybe a DSO that comes to you and says, we already have 140 practices and we need 10 more. And we've already got our sellers lined up and we're going to be ready to go.
Yeah, good points. So that hold back on the purchase price almost always, if not every single time, is going to be tied to the work back of the selling doctor for the DSO as far as length of time. And that's important in the planning process for the practice owner. Any other points we want to bring up as far as what the structure of that sale typically looks like with a DSO sale?
I would just say that you also need to analyze the management fee. Again, if you're going to be a partner, and you have to know when to ask these questions and when not to ask these questions. So if you are no longer an owner, does the management fee really matter to you? No. But if you remain a partner, then it does matter. But if you are just an equity unit holder in the parent company, does the management fee matter? No, it doesn't. So you have to know when things matter to you and when they don't. So in a partnership model, the management fee is important to you because that negates or lowers your profit associated with that practice. So if they're stipulating to a 7% management fee, then you have to look at that and you need to understand that that comes off the top. That comes before your profit is paid out. So if you have a $2 million practice, 7% management fee, that's $140,000. So $140,000 is from the profit. So assuming a $2 million practice, you have $800,000 profit. That might be a little nice. But $140,000 comes off the top, which leaves you with $660. So now all of a sudden you're splitting $660 rather than $800. So these are important mechanisms that you have to factor in, because over a 5-year period, that's a substantial amount of money. So also, how are you being paid? You're always going to be a W-2, but are you paid on adjusted production or collections? There's still some ability, depending upon which model you're in, to still get adjusted production. Otherwise, it's going to be collections. But that might be a 1 to 2% differential. There's a lot of small little things. What I try to tell my clients is, look, these people are not your friends. They are money crunchers. They analyze things 100 times better than you do when it comes to the business side of dentistry. They are looking for every penny because that penny is worth 10 to them. So anytime you can nickel and dime back, you really need to try to push for it. So,
and we talked about this high level as far as how these DSO sales are structured. Obviously, if you've got an outright sale at closing and you're no longer have any ownership equity in the business, that's been the model. It's been around a little longer. And as Jason pointed out, we're seeing that trend of more and more of these partnership models where seller is retained as a junior partner. I guess the question for the panelists, as that's a newer trend, as an attorney, I look at that and go, are there some legal issues that could come down the road through the partnership and trying to exit that partnership? I don't know if we have enough experience and seeing how the industry is going to respond and what these DSOs are doing in those types of models. Do we have any ideas of what that could look like if you go into that model as a junior partner with the DSO?
well, the documents that I'm a part of, and there's no personal liability associated with the ownership, but I mean, there still remains personal responsibility associated with malpractice. They're typically LLCs. They're typically formed in Delaware. So there's definitely some protections there. But that's a great question because it's an untapped, untried question. I need to look because Benevis was a relatively big DSO that went under. And I need to go back and look to see what their liability was because they were dealing with Medicaid fraud and things like that. And so if anybody is going to be held liable, it's going to be somebody who's violating federal statutes because then you don't have the protection. So that's a great question. I'll go back and look at that.
I think another point for our practice owners that are considering a model like that is how easy is it to find another partner to step into their shoes? And what was that additional, that second phase transition going to be when the seller says, I'm done being the junior partner. I really want to retire now for good. Any other thoughts as far as structure on these DSO sales that we want to go over? So shifting gears a little bit, let's say it just
Hey, Jeremy.
now, yeah.
Oh, Jeremy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what I would say when it comes to the different DSO platforms and the structures out there is a common question I get, which is Consani does webinars throughout the whole Northwest. After we talk about DSOs, we commonly get the question is, okay, which is the best DSO out there right now? And my response to that is that it would be reckless for me to answer that because who may be really good and solid today, maybe not so solid in 3 weeks, or maybe not the best option for that doctor in 3 weeks. So these DSOs, I mean, they're adjusting to the market just like everybody else is. So it's not like, yes, they have kind of a standard box in the way they like to do things, but their aggressiveness as far as how much they will pay or how much they'll negotiate with a work back. It varies and changes.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen huge differentials in the last year, where EBITDA multiples have gone up. Before you were hoping to get 5.5 times EBITDA, now you can get much higher depending upon certain variables. So it's always fluctuating. Great point, Adam.
Thanks, Adam. So as far as we look at future options, what is it, what is the situation or scenario look like when a doctor says, I'm just not ready? I've talked with my advisors, I've looked at my goals, my finances, and I think I'm going to be in it at least 5 more years. That's going to be the best decision for me. What is that scenario going to look like for the practice owner?
Yeah, so, sorry, I'm share screen here. So let me run through an illustration here. I think I will kind of answer some of those questions, or at least give some talking points here. So I assume you can see my screen now. Is that true?
Not yet.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so let's just take a practice that would probably fit into their appetite. And here we have a practice that's collecting 850,000. It's got an EBITDA of 177,000. The current owner's compensation through wages, net income, any type of owner discretionary things that get added into their total income. So it comes up to 380,000. The practice is producing 70% by the dentist, 30% by hygiene. Again, ideal, not always the case. A DSO might submit a letter of intent, one-time collection on a practice like this, or maybe even much more. But from a conservative standpoint, these numbers I think are very conservative, and I think my other colleagues here will challenge me on that. 70% of the practice is paid at closing, 30% is paid at the end of 5 years with conditions that Jason and Adam touched on. Let's assume a zero growth in this business illustration, just as simply for the illustration. In any agreement, they're going to have growth tied into it. They're not going to just buy it as is and let it be as is. But again, just to keep things simple. So you're going to have an employment agreement for 5 years, and you'll be compensated in this illustration at 33% of your collections. Again, that might be a little high. You might see something more around 28 to 32%. But again, just to give a best example of what it might look like. And 25 to 35% is kind of that range, but in the dentist production and collection, and nothing on hygiene. So make sure you understand that you're only being paid on your collection. So you're no longer getting paid on everything else in the practice. So if this does what it's supposed to, okay. So day one, you sell to the DSO, you get $595,000 in cash. That's 70% of the purchase price. You're going to work producing 850,000, paid at 33% of your collections, which is 196,350. If you take that for 5 years, and let's assume you hit all of the requirements for the holdback to be paid out at the end of 5 years, which would be the other 255,000, your net from selling to this DSO after 5 years of employment there would be approximately 1.8 million. Doesn't sound too bad. However, if you were to have kept your practice working as you were, no growth, 850,000 in collections, paying yourself 380,000 per year, that's $1.9 million. The exact same number, pretty much as if you would have sold your practice 5 years ago. And now you're positioned to sell your practice to a private individual, maintaining the legacy of your practice. And say you sell it at 65% of collections, which again could be a very conservative number. We've transacted practices near or at 100% and some less. But again, say you sell at 65, that's 552. So 2.4 million compared to 1.8 million. So out of $600,000 swing, and you still own your practice. And so again, what does it look like if you kept it? It could look like this, or even a lot better. I'm sure Adam and Jason have some comments to that.
Yeah, Jason, Adam, any comments you want to add to that scenario?
Well, I think that on both sides, one, I think the individual sale, the good news is you were conservative on both sides. So, I think we can get a higher price for an individual sale. I also think we can get a higher price associated with a DSO sale. I will say though that, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but practices that are doing less than $1 million probably even less than 1.3 to 1.4 million, you're not really getting a big uptick associated with selling to a DSO. You're going to get a slight uptick, but then you have to analyze the risk differential. And then it looks like it's a safer bet to sell to a private practitioner. Where those upticks in values are really coming from are the 2 million plus dental practices, maybe even 1.5 million plus, but I do tend to see those higher multiples, those higher EBITDA numbers happening with the $2 million plus practices. Can you share in an upside? Yes, but that has to be negated by the future volatility, future risk associated with whatever that recap or that holdback is associated with those equity units. So I typically say anything less than $1 million, you probably shouldn't sell to a DSO, just given the uncertainty. But if you're completely set in retirement and you're a risk taker, you love Vegas, then maybe you go for it.
And Jason, you're speaking to specifically to those DSOs that offer equity as part of the compensation package.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also like to say with your numbers, Doug, yes, they were conservative. And I believe there would be a bigger, wider gap, but you also have to look at not being able to fully fund your retirement as well, or have ownership over the retirement plan that you choose that best suits you. Whereas once you become an employee, you're bound as far as, what type of retirement plan you have is to what type of retirement plan they offer. And I guarantee you, you're not going to be able to throw as much money as in it as the one that you own as an entrepreneur. So.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good basis for one scenario, and it kind of brings home this idea that we've touched on a couple of times of the importance of talking to your advisors. So you understand not just the sales price, but the total economic benefit of selling either to a DSO or private buyer, when to sell, making those decisions and planning early on. Are there any other, besides the numbers, are there some other big considerations that you briefly share with practice owners as they're considering the sale to a DSO?
I'd say never ever sign a letter of intent before you talk with any one of us or someone like us. Because once that's been inked, it's hard to unwind it. And that's a problem that a lot of people make. They get this amazing offer, sounds great, but there's so much more to it than just the price. So the LOI is critical, even though sometimes they say non-binding, they might be. So that's one advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, again, how old you are, how long you want to clinically work, what are your retirement goals? All of these things you should be talking with somebody before you start going down this road. Because I can tell you that out of the 15 to 20 people that I talk with on a weekly basis, that I then walk them through the numbers. I then walk them and show them what they're possibly gaining versus what they're possibly losing. I would say 80% of them still want to move forward with the sale to the DSO, even though the economics don't make sense, because they're so invested at the time that they're finally talking to me of that big number that is being sold to them, that they can't see past it to see the long-term issues associated with a sale too early.
Yeah.
So just, talk to somebody who isn't invested in you selling to the DSO.
Yeah.
Because again, I think everyone here in this panel, they want you to do it right. Yes, you're going to sell at one time, but we want you to maximize the sale. We want you to maximize your career earnings so that, as someone said, you're not working until you're 70 if your goal is 55. So anyways.
Well, hit a lot of great topics. Want to open it up to any questions. Again, if you haven't had the opportunity to use the chat feature, shoot us a question for our panelists, and we should have some time for that. Just another thought for our conversation today, beyond the economics, and we've kind of touched on this, some other factors that sometimes play into the sale to DSO is considering the culture of that DSO. How do they treatment plan? Do they have goals? What's driving them? The last thing I want to see a doctor do, especially if they're in their 50s and 60s, and this is at the tail end of their career, is practicing dentistry in a way they don't feel comfortable with. And that comes up a lot in these transitions and affiliations with the DSO, is they're having to change how they practice dentistry, and it's beyond the economics of how it's affecting them in their career. Anything else that you see that affects the seller beyond the economics with the sale to DSO that practice owners should be conscious of?
Well, I guess, Jeremy, one thing they should be conscious of is that when they're dealing with a different level of buyer, when you're dealing with a private buyer, for the most part, there's, it's a pretty evenly matched. I shouldn't say it's pretty evenly matched as far as the goodwill part of things, the intentions, the communication. When they're dealing with a DSO, for the most part, a lot of these DSO salesmen are incredibly highly skilled. They're highly trained. Working a DSO sale for me as a broker is more in line with going to a car dealership and going back and forth with the salesman, who then goes back and forth with their manager to see if they can get you the best deal. It's completely different. These are highly skilled salespeople who've had sales training and are trained to say things and coordinate the whole process of their communication with you in order to achieve their goal, which is to buy your practice at the best possible price with the longest possible work back and the conditions that are most favorable to them, not to the dentist. So that's where people like, Jason comes in, or Doug or I come in, because we know what they're trying to do, and we can help mitigate that. And we can also shop different DSOs to have some competition, and which drives up price and other things that are negotiable.
One of the questions we got was, what's the shortest holdback periods that we see out there for a DSO sale? What are you seeing as far as on the short end of it?
I've been seeing, so there's a difference. I've seen an 18-month one that is somewhat tied to the TTM, the trailing 12 months, and that those revenues continuing, but then they give you a 6-month grace period for this kind of, I don't know, upheaval, if you will, between the transition. And so they'll take, your 12 best months in that 18-month period, and it's provided that they equate to what your trailing 12 months, again, TTM, was prior to the sale, then you get your holdback. There's also a provision, what I've seen in some of these DSO documents, where they'll also withhold a 10% just based upon fraud and misrepresentation as well. I mean, it's really just a way of them holding back more of the money, but I mean, that's usually a 12-month period. So, but those are usually the shortest I've seen.
The period of time could be adjusted also based on the offer. So, the offer might be a higher multiple with a longer holdback period. It could be a smaller multiple based on the holdback period too. So those are a couple of sliding scales that you'll see that do adjust. If you're hard and set that you're on a 3-year work back, well, your offer could be 1 or 2 times less EBITDA than it was if you're willing to stay for that 4 to 5 years. So that's a sliding scale too.
Yeah, definitely could see effect on the sales price based on the holdback period or the holdback / work back period. I think another thing you see also is it depends on where the practice is located and what market it's in. Typically, the more rural and less desirable the market is, sometimes that holdback / work back period is going to be much longer.
Yeah, because it's more about replacing you when you are gone. And if you're in any type of rural setting with high production numbers, it could be very challenging to get someone to relocate to that community.
Well, that brings up a great point, and I won't name the DSO, but there's DSOs out there now that, yes, you get 40% of the recap, but oh, hey, by the way, you can't really sell your 40%. You can only sell 50% of your 40% that you have during the first recap. And it's ingenious, because then what does that do? That forces you to continue to stay associated with the practice, or what you end up doing is you have to sacrifice your remaining 20% ownership and sell it back at 4 times EBITDA to not to the DSO, to a replacement dentist that you find. So the DSO is covered. And if you choose to go, well, then you sacrifice that 20%. So all of these things, again, have to be factored in. But like I said, it's ingenious how they've done that to really protect themselves from losing a provider.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate Jason, Doug, and Adam for joining us on the webinar today, being part of the panel. And this is obviously a very timely and relevant topic, how DSOs are affecting the market, especially as practice sales are very much influenced with DSOs, both some good things and some bad things. We recommend that you reach out to an advisor. Jason posted the email addresses for our panelists in the Q&A, and this will be has been recorded and will be available on demand to rewatch for future reference. Thank you everyone for participating, joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.